Hello and welcome to Talking with the Experts. My name is Rose Davidson from rosedavidson.com, and Talking with the Experts is about all things business by business owners for business owners. And you can find it on all popular podcast platforms and on YouTube. And today my guest is Ken. And Ken is from the Vanguard Group of Leadership, and we'll be discussing leadership. And Ken, through his work and through the Vanguard Group of Leadership, helps senior leaders transform themselves and their organisations. He has helped to lead the transformational turnarounds of Pharmaca, Shearer Ploughing and Bausch and Lomb, with a focus on building strong leadership and dynamic new cultures. Welcome, Ken, and thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me with you.
So tell me a little bit more about what the Vanguard Group of Leadership is about and what they do exactly.
So really, Rose, we do two things. One is that we develop networks of C-suite leaders to help them further refine their own leadership. And the other thing that we do is we advise the same group of people on change and transformation within their own organizations. So typically change led from the top.
Perfect. And so we were just discussing on off camera before about how you viewed leadership in business. Perhaps you want to start that again and we can have a little bit of a discussion about that.
Sure. I think our perspective is that leadership drives most other aspects of business, and it's, if you like, a kind of essential to all other things functioning. And for example, as we talked about, you can have a great strategy and you can have great other things, but if you don't have really strong positive leadership at the top, those things will either be wasted or they won't be maximized.
Yep. So is a leader born a leader, or can you make them a leader? Can they learn how to be a leader?
I think it's a little bit like the nature and nurture thing. It's a little bit of both. So I think some people are naturally inclined toward leadership, and other people are inclined to followership or to being individual contributors. And there's nothing good or bad about any of those things. However, I think if one aspires to being a really top-notch leader, it's rare that people achieve that without some work at it. So, for example, we all know somebody, when we were in kindergarten probably, who had leadership traits. They got people to gather around and build something together instead of sitting in corners. But to take that kind of capability and apply it with bandwidth across a global organization with, say, 60,000 people, that's a different, taking it to a different level. And I think getting it to that level is something that you ordinarily need to develop.
Yeah. So, question's just gone out of my head just then. It was really a good question too. So what is your view? What is your view on being a good leader?
Well, I think good leader is good is actually a very important point, because you can be a bad leader and be very successful. You can be a highly successful leader. Hitler was a great bad leader, and we've seen some others more recently. So I think good is a really important element in that, and that means having a moral compass. So I think good leaders do know which way is up from a partly intuitive and partly learned sense of what's right and wrong. I think that concept of business integrity cuts across cultures. Sometimes people think that these things are based in religion or other areas, but I think basic concepts of fairness and justice and what's the right thing to do often flies pretty well from Japan to the US to China. And I think another key ingredient certainly is an ability to actually to listen to people versus tell people. There was probably a time when telling people was the mode for leadership. I think that era is over. You have to be a really good listener and able to lead from behind. And leading from behind, I think, means really being able to get people to buy into an idea, to think of it as their own, and then to advance it. And you are probably being very successful when no one remembers that you made that happen. Or people will probably give you credit for that actually more freely when you did it that way. imposing your point of view is generally not going to fly. I think it's actually an interesting point generationally as well, because I think perhaps more than ever the more recent generation of business people, say in their 20s to 30s, particularly don't have time for top-down direction, and you have to really convince them that they are going where they want to go. So I think that's another key ingredient. And then a third ingredient that I found very important in people I've worked with and changes that I've been involved in is a sense of perspective. And that means just being able to weigh a lot of different inputs, be able to do that, though, not in a kind of slow fashion, but a quick fashion, but take on board a lot of opinions, take on a lot of differing perspectives, but then not dilly-dally on coming to a conclusion. And usually you're doing that with incomplete knowledge, but you're doing it with a range of knowledge. So to me, that's perhaps a third critical factor of leadership that sets really good leaders apart from managers.
Yeah, I agree. I think a good leader allows people to manage upwards rather than having to be micromanaged by their manager or by their leader. I think, I mean, anyone can be a leader, I think, in their own way. I mean, sometimes you just have to lead yourself into the right directions. But leading a business is a little bit different, where if you've got team members, you know, you've got to, communication to me is a great key.
Yeah, I would agree totally with that, Rose. And I think the another way of thinking about really good leadership is on a kind of a spectrum of forms of leadership. And so one way I've thought about this is situational leadership, and by that meaning that there are moments when you do need to be top down. For example, in a crisis, when the ship is sinking, when the business is hit a rock, you just don't have time to get a lot of points of view on something. At the other end of the spectrum is consensus leadership, where you basically want everyone in the room to not only go along with something, but agree and have no reservations. That's pretty hard to do sometimes. So most of leadership, I think, is in the middle, where you're asking people to, even if they don't agree, to go along with what the group has decided. It may also be that you convince people that even though they may not agree with it in full, they agree with it 80%, and that's where we're going to go. That's probably the area where most leadership occurs, and that's where I think your point about communication is so important, because that's where the highest levels of leadership communication have to occur, including the kind of non-communication, if you like, of waiting for listening to other people communicate to you, but to do what's called active listening.
Yeah, that's a good point. Active listening is something that a lot of leaders don't do. They hear, but they don't actually listen to what's being said to them. So, and then they don't take it on board, and then everyone below them gets disheartened or whatever, because their comments, their issues, their concerns aren't cared for or listened to, basically.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think that may also go together with another aspect of this, which is to have a healthy sense of ego, but also a healthy sense of humility. So the two things can go together. In other words, you know that you are very good at what you're trying to do as a leader, but you also have a healthy humility about whether you're the smartest person in the room to get there every time.
Yeah.
And there was a great comment by someone I work with at a healthcare company, who said that I'd get a dollar for every person who says they're a top leader who thinks they are the smartest person in the room. He said, my theory is that I'm there to bring together the smartest people, but I'm never it.
No, and a leader doesn't have to know everything, and they don't have to be the smartest person in the room. This is why you have a team, because you bring these people together, and that's the job of the leader, is to find out who what skill sets each one has and what they can bring to the table.
Yeah, and I think it's also interesting. I was just chatting with some young college students who are going to potentially be interns for us from the college I went to, Amherst College in Massachusetts in the U.S. And they were really asking how we would go about working with them. And I said, well, we're not really going to be telling you what to do. We're going to be giving you a project to work on that's really important to us, and hopefully it'll be really important for you. And then our mindset is that we're there to help you succeed at doing it versus telling you how to do it. And they said, oh, that's really refreshing. That's not what I thought leadership was about at all. And I said, well, we may not succeed at it every day, but that's how we're going to try to do it. And I think it was a good message.
Yeah, it is a good message. I mean, leaders don't have to be, they don't have to succeed at everything. You know, sometimes, as you say, you have to show a bit of humility. If you fail at something, you know, at least own up to it and admit that you were wrong, or, you know, try and find a fix for it.
Yeah, I think what we found with this Vanguard network, which I mentioned, which is this network of top executives who are all essentially coming together to work with each other on leadership capabilities and to also raise their level of performance to an even higher level. But one of the things that we've talked about sometimes is in small groups, people sharing the thing which was their biggest failure and what they learned from it. And it's sort of an obvious question, but people don't often talk about that enough. And of course, you do learn most from your failures. There's, you know, when you're succeeding at something, the lessons are perhaps somewhat obvious, so which is keep doing that. But the failure ones are where you learn, for example, not only that you had the wrong strategy, but maybe you also had the wrong interpersonal skills, or perhaps you weren't listening actively to people who were telling you were going the wrong way. And so those kinds of learnings are really interesting. And I find that the most successful leaders are the ones who are most comfortable owning up to those things and talking about them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we all have things that we've done in our lifetime, even on a personal level, that, you know, we're either not proud of, or, you know, could have been done better, or whatever reason. And as long as we've learned from those, I think that's a good starting point. And, you know, and you just learn not to do them again. Or, you know, because if you keep repeating them, you haven't learned a lesson.
Yeah, I think I was thinking the other day about sort of great leaders in history, and those who have demonstrated an ability to learn from failure. One of the interesting ones, I guess, to me was in politics was Harry Truman in the U.S., who was a pretty subdued guy prior to becoming president, which sort of happened by accident with him with the death of President Roosevelt. And you know, he kind of rose to the occasion, but he, I think, was quite open in talking about, you know, kind of humble beginnings, and also things that didn't work out very well for him when he was moving forward in his career and what he learned from it. And I think that's a pretty good example.
Mm. And sharing stories, like as a leader, it doesn't, I don't think anyway, it's my opinion, that it doesn't hurt to share stories of, you know, your rise through the ranks or whatever. I mean, it doesn't have to be a brag session, but it sometimes others can learn lessons from, you know, your rise to being where you are in the hierarchy of the business.
Yeah, that's another interesting aspect of great leadership, I think, which is the ability to tell people a story and to make it interesting and help them kind of either learn something from your own story or develop a interest in being part of the organizational story. Because you know, people often end up getting subjected to PowerPoint slides and various dictates or statements or whatever about what they need to do. But there's plenty of evidence, scientific and otherwise, that shows that what people respond to best is a story where they can participate. Either they learn from it or they participate in it. So either the idea is I'm telling you a story where you'll learn a moral or a lesson from it that'll help you or help us get where we're going, or it's a story about the journey that we're on, you know, whoever we are, and you're a part of it. And so, you know, there's the classic one that, I mean, there are many classic ones like this, but the one that is very familiar in the U.S. is this story of how John F. Kennedy went to the Space Center before it was named for him, so it was a different name at the time, but he was there to inspect one of the first space program rockets to take place. And he asked this guy who was sweeping out a shed what he was doing, what he did. And he said, you know, Mr. President, I'm here to send people to the moon. And so that's the story that had been, you know, and he was right. I mean, his job was not sweeping a floor. it was in aid of something bigger. And so it's that sense of purpose that you can convey. But I doubt that he acquired that point of view by just being told, you're sending someone to the moon. It was probably through stories that were told about how everyone at the Space Center had a role to play. And this is where we are in our journey. You can help us get to the next stage. And that's what Kennedy was hearing.
Yeah, and that's, that is what a good leader does. It's bringing
Yep.
people together so that they have a common purpose, a common goal. It's, it's got to be something that everyone believes in.
Yes, and at the same time, that's where I think the moral element comes back in because, as we've seen in the U.S., we've seen in other countries, that it's very easy to turn people to a common cause that is actually very dangerous and divisive in a way, but it appeals to their worst instincts. It causes, riots in the U.S. Capitol. This kind of thing is the bad side of leadership. And then I think that's where there's a kind of a moral responsibility by leaders to be ethical and to think about good leadership versus only effective leadership. Maybe that's the way to put it.
Yeah, I think sometimes ego can get in the way. You become a leader and, you think that, because you're at that particular place, it makes your head swell basically, and your ego takes over, and you just forget about everything else.
Yeah, and I think there's a really interesting CEO or former CEO now of LabCorp, which is one of the biggest clinical testing organizations in the world. And Dave King is his name, and he was a participant in one of our forums. And he really exuded a certain humility, and he said that one of the biggest challenges for top leaders is to put all that to one side because, the fact that you're in charge of tens or hundreds of thousands of people, the fact that you get a certain kind of special treatment wherever you go, you may fly in a private jet. People sometimes start to, in fact, very often start to really confuse the role with themselves. And so he said, essentially I wake up every morning reminding myself that I'm Dave King and this happens to be my role. I'm not the role. And that's a very interesting way of thinking, and it helps, I think, a lot in keeping keeping a sense of proportion, and also recognizing that you too shall pass, which in fact he did, not from life, but from that role. He's now retired, and he's no longer, I don't think, flying in a private jet, but he's still a very balanced guy.
Yeah, and I think you need to keep your feet on the ground. You need to keep balanced the whole time. You can't just let you said the role dictate who you are in life, because you are not the role. You are who you are, and it's important to remember that. Even it doesn't matter who you are, if you're a leader or you're not. And if you're given some role of responsibility, you are not the role or the title. You are who you are.
And the question for you: who do you find in the Australian environment currently is measuring up as a really good leader, either in business or in politics?
I try to keep out of politics as much as possible. I think through the pandemic, I think each of our state leaders has done a job worthy of their responsibilities. I know the majority of people don't agree with some of them, and they don't have to agree with everything, but they've kept us pretty safe. And our level of infections and deaths has been kept to pretty low compared to other countries. So I think overall, I think they've done a pretty good job.
Yeah, probably in contrast with here, whereas we've got tremendous problems, partly because everything is divided up with very little central coordination, at least up till now. But one thing that has been interesting to me is how important this whole thing has become to CEOs and C-suite leaders in at least in the U.S. And obviously, they don't have much control over the pandemic as a whole, but it's really how they respond inside their own organization. And we did a number of dialogue sessions, which involves several CEOs talking about various topics with a large group of other CEOs joining in the conversation. And one thing that stood out to me was a woman CEO who I know from many years ago when we were colleagues, and she was standing in her kitchen with the dog running around and the kids moving around, and kind of pandemonium. But she was very collected, and I think I asked her what was the purpose. Did she have a purpose of that? And she said, yeah, absolutely. She said it's to make everyone in my team, meaning the whole company, feel comfortable when they see me on Zoom or anywhere else, that I'm just like them and I have the same distractions. I'm not in, I'm not, she wasn't wearing a kind of business-like outfit. She looked fine, but she was wearing what probably, a sweatshirt and not in high heels and all the rest of it. And she said, yeah, it's a real strategic decision that she would be right in the thick of things in her family, just like everyone else would be. And, she probably had a small office that she could have sat in, but she wanted to make the point that that's not how she operated. And that
that's how good leadership is. When there's crisis, don't put yourself above. I mean, I know you have to make decisions, but I think she did the right thing in the fact that she made herself human.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I don't know enough about her colleagues to know how they reacted to it, but I think you're right. I mean, I'm sure it was the right thing to do. And also, she's pretty savvy, so if it was backfiring, she would have changed it. But I think, it wasn't. She wasn't pretending that she didn't have her job. She was just showing that she was doing her job in the same circumstances they were.
Yeah, I totally agree. So where can people find you, Ken?
Well, they can find us at my own email address. That's probably the easiest thing. It's ken@vanguardgroup.nyc. And you can also find us online at just looking for the Vanguard Group for Leadership, and we turn up. The thing that we're not is the Vanguard Finance Group, which is a much bigger organization. They don't do leadership, but it's actually a great halo effect to have, because anyone who's looking for us, or actually looking at them, comes across us. So it's not a bad thing.
Terrific. And so any wise words of wisdom before we finish up today?
Oh, goodness. I don't think any wisdom, but I would say that one thing we didn't touch on is the wisdom of the people who work at the front lines. And so one thing that we emphasize a lot is that people at the top should talk constantly to the people so-called at the bottom, because they really are the ones who know what's going on. And they know what's going on with the customers. They know what's going on in the organization. And they also know good leadership from not so good leadership. And so really good CEOs and C-suite people that I've worked with have made a point of reaching out to those people directly, and it really pays off.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's one of the things that, it is at the pinnacle of being a good leader, is going on the coalface and actually talking to the staff there, because they know what's going on, and they can tell you if they're unhappy, or customers are unhappy, or there's some issue that needs to be addressed, because if you're sitting in an ivory tower, you will never know.
Absolutely. And I think one of the greatest people to look at in that respect is Alexander the Great. It's exactly what he did, is talk to the troops, and they talk back, probably in a different fashion than they do today. But I think he was really very successful because of that.
He was. He conquered great, did things. Anyway, Ken, thank you so much for your time today. And hopefully we can talk again.
Thank you for having me. It was fun, and I really enjoyed that. So thanks again for the opportunity.
Oh, you're welcome. See you again soon. Bye.
Take care.
You too.
Talking with the experts.